Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 6th of September 2024. It is the beginning of autumn. The kids are back at school. The weather this Friday is supposed to be better than it's been at any time during the summer, typically. And Sarah, instead of being out and enjoying the sunshine, will be at home making for her kids bacon and cabbage to go with their Aran sweaters as she packs them off to the FLA with their come-ons to play hurling. I probably pronounced that word wrong and we'll get abused for it in the comments, but there you go. The thing you play hurling with. We'll talk about that, Sarah, we're going to talk about that story. We'll talk about why you're doing all that. We're also going to talk about abuse in schools, which has reared its head this week. We're going to talk about Oasis concert tickets. We're going to talk about the cost of bike shelters in the Oireachtas, and we're going to talk about what happened in the Middle East during the week. How are you, and how do you get on with the bacon and cabbage?
Well, for starters, you should remind people that last week when we said when we were ending the podcast, we said we were going shooting, and I have to say that you were impressively good at shooting.
Don't tell them that.
I was not.
No,
well, you were very good.
We just tell people that, like, Sarah's issue with the shooting was like she just couldn't wait to get the shot off. As soon as she saw the target, she was like, bang, bang, bang. Shot a little bit too quickly.
I think it was like a microcosm for my personality. I was like, just like that. But you're very good. Just in case anybody was wondering how it went great. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
On the subject of the bacon and cabbage, I mean, like it's a week old now, so it seems like kind of an old news story, but I saw it as an example of the mask slipping. People will talk about, oh, you know, who is it that signed off on that? But the truth is that for a school book to get to the curriculum for 14-year-olds nationally, multiple people had to sign off on that. Somebody had to write it. Somebody had to approve it. And probably a number of people had to approve it. And so I think it's an example of there is a section of Irish society who hate, you know, a lot of the traditional Irish culture. And this was an example of the mask slipping on that. I went to an all-Irish school, as I've said before on the podcast. And so when it comes to Gaelic games, Irish music, playing Irish instruments, speaking Irish, a lot of what was depicted in that example is people that I went to school with. So, I mean, I think a lot of people were pretty insulted by it. But, you know, are you that surprised?
No, I'm not surprised, but I thought that what struck me about it that I didn't see a lot of people talking about was the kind of undertone that these children were being abused. So it was the family we do things, but it was the kids talking, and one of them wanted to become a yoga teacher, and her father would be having none of that sort of stuff now, and they weren't allowed to watch RTE television, and they weren't allowed to play other sports other than Gaelic games, and they weren't allowed to have different kinds of foods. And they weren't allowed to wear anything other than Aran jumpers. And I really don't know who's ever comfortably worn an Aran jumper. So that maybe that does qualify as child abuse. And it was all directed at this idea that the parents in the family were backwards and holding their kids back, as opposed to the kids in the other family who were getting to go to America and eat all sorts of different food and meet people from different cultures. And that message was going to impressionable kids. Now, we all know, because we were kids, that every kid in the world, apart from maybe, I don't know, Bill Gates's kids, if he has any, feel like they're oppressed by their parents. I did. I remember when I was in my early years, when I was a spoiled brat, I was like, everyone else is doing really cool stuff, but, you know, not me, and that's my parents' fault. And I think that's it was completely untrue. I was completely wrong. But I think that's a thing that a lot of people will relate to. And I think to put something into schools that basically says if your parents are like this, they're not cool like other parents. That is, aside from everything else, that is fundamentally insidious. I don't know how you say you don't know how it got published. I have no idea how it got published. I can say that I'm not sure the Department of Education would have necessarily had to sign off on it. They sign off on the curriculum, and then basically it's the publishers of these books, in this case EDCO, who've apologised, who actually put the book on the market, and then schools select it. So yeah, but it's just it's one of those ones where you just wonder if that's something we spotted. What else is on the curriculum in all the other school books that we haven't necessarily spotted? What's happening in classrooms that we aren't necessarily aware of?
Yeah, and also it's an attitude that is present in our culture, becoming more and more present. This is an example of you know, an agenda that's getting more ballsy by the day, but it's everywhere, and it's just the mask has slipped. Okay, they messed up a bit here, but there's an attitude, a sneering attitude about certain types of Irish people. And if that book was written about any other group in Irish society with such sneering kind of contempt for their culture, what they eat, what they do, or whatever, there'd be a national inquiry about it. But it's okay to sneer and stomp all over Irish, iron jumpers and bacon and cabbage. I mean, anyway, it's been taken off apparently, so that's progress. But the rot the self-loathing rot amongst a huge group of Irish society about themselves and who we are is still there.
Do you know, I was writing about that very thing on way back on Monday, and I was saying that it strikes me that one of these paradoxes of Irishness is that if you go to tourist shops in the west of Ireland and you pick up a postcard to send home to the Americans, if you're a tourist, you'll still see all the lads in iron jumpers smoking pipes, the crowds of sheep beside thatched cottages with the slogan Irish traffic jam, lads in fields made with stone hedges, all that sort of stuff. We still sell that to the Americans and others as sort of the image of the country. And if you go to kind of like an Irish festival in the USA, and I was accidentally caught in one once, and it was like stepping into like one of those Tom Cruise movies where he does the terrible accent. I can't remember the one I'm talking about.
Far and away.
Far and away. The Americans still have that image of Ireland. So they still buy into the whole kind of like the Irish wear iron sweaters and farm sheep and live on the sides of mountains and kind of like cut turf and are oppressed by the British. That image is very much still there. And I didn't think it was a coincidence that the depiction that we're supposed to hate was that very depiction, because I think it must be mortifying if you're an Irish progressive. You spent years you've liberalized the country on divorce. You've been the first country in the world to vote in gay marriage. You had your massive triumph in repeal. You're now the most liberal modern country in the world. You walk down Dublin, there are rainbow flags everywhere. And the Americans still think of you as Paddy by the side of the road minding his sheep. And I think that is the source of an awful lot of self-loathing, that they've tried to build San Francisco, and San Francisco still looks at us like, a John Wayne movie. And I think that's part psychologically behind it, but that's just speculation on my part. But I think there's a real issue for people there that is what they hate, and they want to tell the world that they hate it.
But then when an American president comes to visit, they do this performative diddly-eye thing, like as if, so I don't really get it, because on the one hand, you want to be seen as like, say, San Francisco progressive, all of this. But then when somebody comes, an American president comes here or whatever, they do the performative diddly-eye dancing to reinforce that. So I'm not sure what the kind of psychological...
Like when Olivia O'Leary nearly fainted when the Queen of England looked at a pint of Guinness and inspected it. Olivia thought this was the greatest thing of all time. Like we do the paddywhackery stuff, and I think there's a degree to which progressives do it and then really hate themselves for it. I think it's psychologically fascinating. I find the book psychologically fascinating. I find the whole thing, because who would do that? You wouldn't. I mean, England in many ways is a woke society, like Ireland. You wouldn't find a book in England about kind of like Aunt Fanny and Uncle Dick having tea, and we're not allowed to have coffee because we only drink tea, and and we only play cricket, and we only watch the BBC. That you just wouldn't find that kind of self-loathing of Englishness in England, which is what I find fascinating. If anyone has that kind of book out there, send it on to me, but I don't think it exists.
No. I don't think it exists either.
So it's just, anyway, it'll run and run, but I think it's going to, hopefully it will have a positive effect of raising awareness amongst parents about what might be in these books, and the rest of us will be looking more closely at books. I've already had a couple of tips about stuff that's in other books that I'll be following up or getting the team to follow up over the next week or so. Anyway, that wasn't the only big story of the week. Do you want to deal with what happened in the Middle East quickly first? Because I know actually you felt quite strongly affected by, you were telling me earlier on by one of the events.
Oh, I'm going to preface this by saying this isn't a, Israel got, I appreciate that people are dying on both sides and it's horrendous. But the 6 hostages that were killed this week, you know, you and I were talking about it off on the phone, and I was saying that sometimes something just affects you profoundly for some reason. And so for people who don't know, one of the hostages that died this week, his name was Hirsch Goldberg Poland, and he was 23, and he was kidnapped from the Nova Festival on the 7th of October. And when he was kidnapped, or just before he was kidnapped, he was seriously injured. He lost his arm. He picked up, as is my understanding, he picked up a grenade that was thrown into a kind of a area that a few people were hiding, and he threw it and it blew his arm off. And then he wasn't heard from again. And his mother, Rachel Goldberg Poland, her efforts to kind of raise awareness about Hirsch just like really captured my attention for the last few months, because obviously I'm a mother as well, and she has 3 children. He's her only son, and she really just was. She spoke at the DNC. She was on every like TV show in the States. They're American. They moved to Jerusalem when he was, I think, 14 or something. And anyway, I would have said to Keith a few times over the last few months, you know, he might still be alive, you know, like, I mean, just because his arm is blown off. And Keith was like, realistically, you know, he's probably dead, because, you know, getting your arm blown off, there's an artery, like significant injury, like you probably won't survive it unless you get serious medical attention. And then as different hostages were released, one of them, I remember, said that a lot of the injured hostages were brought to a hospital and given medical treatment. And I was like, Keith, look, you know, maybe he was brought to the hospital, maybe, you know, he could have survived, like they could have helped his arm, they could have. And Keith was like, okay, Sarah, like, I don't know what it is about this particular guy. I just followed it I was showing you the other day that like my most searched things, I would search every few days for any news about this guy Hirsch, and that maybe he might be alive. Anyway, he was alive the whole time for 11 months, but he unfortunately was killed this week. The 6 of them, as is my understanding from what I'm reading, were shot this week. And it's just had a profound effect on me. Like and again, if you're planning on going into the comments and writing, well, what about the others? This isn't about that. This is just about a 23-year-old who went to a concert, who was kidnapped, whose mother has desperately begged and campaigned for his release for 11 months and prayed that he was still alive. And he's died this week after managing to stay alive for 11 months. And it's just tragic. I'll never understand it.
You say killed, but like you can be killed by a block falling on your head. I mean, let's be clear about what happened in this case to him and the other 5, which is that they were within moments of being rescued. And their captors shot them in the head in cold blood out of sheer naked spite, to ensure that they wouldn't undergo the humiliation of having more captives rescued. Look, I'm not going to sit here. I mean, people talk about the conflict and people come after me because of particular view they believe that I hold on the conflict.
Yeah, I know.
But like, you know, it is obviously horrifying losses have been suffered on both sides. But to shoot somebody in the head in cold blood rather than allow them to go back to their family out of sheer hatred and spite, that tells you something, I think, about the nature of the government of the Gaza Strip, and the kind of, I mean, if they'll do that to an enemy, what do they not do to their own people? So yeah, I mean, look, it's not the time and place to talk about the wider war or the wider conflict, but I mean, I really wonder what it is that people expect the Israelis to do. I really do. I mean, let's say you get the ceasefire in the morning. Does anybody for one moment think that ceasefire will last? Does anyone for one moment think that an organization that would do this to hostages or that has repeatedly broken ceasefires in the past won't just do it again? There are those who will say, and there were those who probably pop up in the comments to say, Palestine from the river to the sea. Okay, you want to destroy a country of 8 million people and tell the people to move and go somewhere else. How are you different to what you're suggesting the Israelis are doing in Gaza?
But it's not even about that, because I'm I can just hear I can feel the comments already, and it's not even about that. It's just about sometimes, it can just be about, there's been other things that we've talked about online and offline about, horrific things. There was a NICU in with babies. Do you remember the hospital? Babies were left behind. Couldn't bear it. Like, I had a child in the NICU myself, and it makes me feel kind of ill to think about it. So there are things that happen, and you and I were talking on the phone about this earlier on, and sometimes oddly you become kind of desensitized to things, and you hear things, and then there are things that for whatever reason they just profoundly affect you. And this is a podcast about that, where we talk about our interpretation of the week that really was. And this week, a 23-year-old who went to a concert, whose poor mother, it's his mother for me. And he has his 2 sisters and a father and whatever, but as a mother myself, it's the mother for me. 11 months of hell, and for it to come so close, and then him to be dead doesn't, like, it's just, I like, for me, for whatever reason, the pain of that, it's just, I can't comprehend it.
Yep. It's funny, I was saying to you earlier on that didn't particularly affect me emotionally at all. I mean, in part because the whole thing is so horrible. I don't think that you can. And I get it. I mean, there's somebody.
I'm not making a value judgment on one night life over. It's nothing to do with that.
I didn't think you were. What I was going to say is that I understand exactly what you're saying, because there's somebody else, and she can speak for herself, but she's been a guest on this podcast in the past, who takes a very different view to you and I, maybe on the war. And when she messages me about it, as she regularly does, I can feel the kind of emotional pain she is feeling on behalf of the people of Gaza, who she says are being slaughtered wholesale, and that is really affecting people deeply. And I think sometimes you don't appreciate how much people identify with a particular story in the news. And I think for me, that's because I spent my day looking at stories in the news. If I started identifying with all of them, I'd be in an awful situation. I remember somebody very close to me actually was way back at the beginning of the Ukraine war, when there was the whole siege of Mariupol. Do you remember that? And that somebody very close to me was just absolutely living every bullet be fired there, every update about the guys down in the tunnel defending, and was, when that all ended, was brokenhearted. So people do, I get that, and it's happened to me in the past, but oddly with me, more with sort of animal stories than with people stories. I don't know.
I know who it is. I know who it is who's sending you that stuff, because I've spoken to her, and I agree with her. Like, I don't have a clear, I'm certainly not in favor of what Israel are doing or anything like it. So it's not simple. I think that people, I just think, like you said, people get affected particularly by certain things some of the time. And for me this week, this was it. 2 nights in a row, I had horrific nightmares about home invasions, and, because I don't know, I think I speak for everyone when I say I just want this to be over.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. We all want it to be over. All right, well, I'll tell you. You talked about a story that really struck you this week. I'll talk about a story that struck me this week. In a totally different way, not in any way emotionally, but a story that kind of has bothered me. And the story has been about the abuse in Catholic schools, and it's bothered me in a way that maybe it hasn't bothered other people, because in recent days, we got this scoping report, which runs to 5 volumes in length. I mean, the thing you would be here. I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings appendices, which go on forever, don't run as half the length of this thing. And we got the announcement that there's going to be a full inquiry, and we got the announcement that there's going to be a Garda investigation into potential collusion in schools. And we got the usual sort of the church is villainous, it'll have to pay up, and this might cost 5 billion, and people are going to get an average of 70 grand in compensation each, and all the usual stuff. And I've just been looking at it going, have we all sort of lost all perspective here? Because I was looking at the front page of The Independent today, Thursday, when we're recording this, and it was something like thousands of lives ruined And the media seems to have just run with this narrative and like, for me, I'm not coming at this from a Catholic perspective. I'm not coming at this from a, like, we must defend the honor of the Holy Church perspective or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm coming at it from the perspective of, well, hang on a minute. First of all, let's just talk about what's new here. The Spiriton Brothers, who are the institution that run Blackrock College, the Holy Ghost Fathers, actually investigated this abuse themselves way back in 2012. And they identified 48 abusive priests who had been in their care over the past, 1927 to the present, whatever it is. The inquiry this week, the scoping report, which comes literally 14 years later, identified 49, so one extra. There have been, I think, of the Spiritons in Ireland since 1927, there have been, I think, 1,280 of them have served as teachers in schools, of which 49 have been identified as having been potentially abusers. That's the first thing. And the other thing is they've already paid out loads of compensation to victims. So a lot of this is sort of stuff that has already been covered, and it's sort of being presented as something fresh and new. And the church, the institutions have to pay up. That's the first thing. But the second thing, Sarah, what's really bothering me is the contents of the scoping report, because we keep being told that there are 308 schools, I think it is, and something like 900. We worked it out, something like 2.7 pedophiles per school is what they suggested. And some of the stuff that's actually in the scoping report is extraordinary. So there's on one level you have accusations that priests or teachers were getting sexual gratification from administering corporal punishment. So the accusation is somebody was giving students a caning and getting their jollies out of that, which seems to me to be a very hard accusation to prove. And then on the other hand, there's one extraordinary accusation of a group of 4 priests in a school who were allegedly working together. And this has kind of caught the public imagination, which is why the Gardaí are investigating it. Working together in a sort of paedophile cabal. They were abusing children together. They were purchasing fetish underwear for the students so that they could wear them during the day and they'd be brought in and abused. I mean, that just strikes me as an extraordinary claim. I mean, that first of all, that in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, there was, you could go out and buy fetish underwear for children, strikes me as a startling accusation. Secondly, the idea that pedophiles would work together and identify themselves to each other in that time frame strikes me as a startling accusation. And I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying if it is true, it'll be about the most depraved story that's ever happened on the island of Ireland. But at the same time, I wonder where the presumption of skepticism and the presumption of innocence has gone in relation to these stories. And I really do think this has the potential to become an Irish version of Operation U-Tree, which is what happened in the UK when people started arresting all sorts of celebrities on the basis of sexual assault and sexual abuse allegations that transpired not to be entirely, or at least consistently, accurate. Am I wrong? Or, I mean, some people will shoot me for saying what I've just said.
I mean, I think that, so some of the stuff I read, said that other members of staff in the schools were aware that it was going on, so, walking in on it and just walking back out. And it seems like, as you say, it was 800 schools, 300 and something active.
The other way around, I think. It's
Sorry,
800 active in 300 schools,
Yeah, so that's 2 point whatever pedophiles per school. I think from my reading of it, it makes me think that child sexual abuse was not just common, but an epidemic in these schools. That for those numbers and that level of collusion and that level of turning a blind eye by people who weren't involved in it has to have been standard. And if that's the case, well, I mean, it kind of blows your mind, no? I mean, we're of an age where, we're fairly familiar with the stories of what was going on in Ireland But this is on a whole other level. Like, I went through the list of schools, and a lot of them, it was, you know, like number of complaints and then number of accused. And it was like 6, 15 I saw. 15 in one school. 15. I mean, that's not 15 events. That's 15 people. 15 people in one school. So to me, that means something rotten way more rotten in a society than I ever imagined possible.
Yeah, that's one explanation. The other explanation, I'm going to preface what I say here by saying the Holy Ghost Fathers investigated this themselves and found a number of abusive priests, as I said, 48 in their own ranks, and had been paying out compensation. And I'm not sure off the top of my head whether those 48 were all sexually abusive or whether some were just physically abusive or some were emotionally abusive. But they found this. And there is no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt that there was a substantial level of sexual abuse, particularly by the way, it is overwhelming. It is overwhelmingly committed against boys of the age 12 to 14. They are the median victim in these schools, and it is all generally, the single biggest appearer in the list are sort of like Christian Brothers schools, and it's all boys schools, and it's boys 12 to 14 targeted by paedophile males. And there was undoubtedly a lot of that. But at the same time, I am concerned about the way this is going, because you have in this country something called the presumption of innocence. You and I have it. If you are accused tomorrow, if somebody came to me and accused you of something absolutely horrendous, say somebody said you were abusing an elderly neighbor or something like that, I have the right, you have the right to be presumed innocent of that accusation. And what does the right to presumed innocent mean? It means I should be presuming that you have been falsely accused. That's what it means. That is the presumption of innocence. If somebody is accusing me of a crime and I say you have to presume that I'm innocent, that means you have to presume that I have been falsely accused of the crime. Now, in this instance, we have hundreds of people who stand accused of crimes, Sarah, that just can't be proved in many instances. The nature of historic sex crimes is such that, if somebody comes out and says that myself and this other person had a sexual encounter in 1993 that was not consensual, there will be no witnesses because sexual encounters are generally private. There will be no physical evidence. The only thing a prosecution can really do is establish that the alleged attacker had the means and the motive by maybe placing them in the same place together. But it's almost impossible. You're a barrister. Who am I telling? I mean, the difficulty in putting that case together beyond a reasonable doubt is almost impossible, which is why so few of these cases ever get to court. Yet here we are having an inquiry that essentially, and a media that is essentially presuming guilt of hundreds and hundreds of people, many of them dead with no right to defend their names, on the basis of accusations that run wildly different. I mean, somebody, as I said, in the report says the corporal punishment was criminal and they were getting sexual gratification out of it. How can anyone prove that accusation? And yet somebody is being tarred with it at a time when corporal punishment was sadly legal. It's just, to me, the whole thing just smells a bit bad, and I think it is a coincidence. This may make me awfully cynical that this inquiry is being rushed out ahead of a general election campaign so our politicians can give homilies about the terrible dark past of this country and how much we still have to set to rights. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but I don't think I am.
I mean, I think, what you said about presumption of innocence is, it's all lovely and everything, but we know, and I'm not going to name any specific cases, but I'm sure people can think of a couple, that with modern internet and, Twitter and whatever other million things there are, especially when it comes to certain types of crime in Ireland, people sort of straddle the fence a bit on, believing women and presumption of innocence. So I know you're saying that this is 12 to 14-year-old boys and it's slightly different, but my point is, in general, when it comes to sex crimes, there's a big problem with believing victims and the presumption of innocence. How do you balance those two things? It's very, very difficult. And a lot of people get on their high horse and they go, wild for the accusation, and they don't presume the innocence of, they presume the truth, that they presume the honesty of the victim. And I'm not saying that that's inherently bad all the time, but it's problematic from a justice point of view, particularly because sometimes people are wrongly accused. I mean, it happens it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. And so I think that the presumption of innocence is all very well, but on these kind of things, because of our history, particularly with child sex abuse in this country or whatever, I just think presumption of innocence goes out the window.
Yeah, but I think that's a problem. That's that's why I'm talking about it. I think that is a problem. Obviously there's this issue with rape trials, and there has been for some time, and this is a genuine issue, and like we're feminists and indeed the rest of us should talk about it more, where you have women who go in and make an accusation, say I've been raped, and then they are put on trial, like horrifying stuff where people's underwear is exhibited to the jury, and the list of their past sexual partners and all this sort of stuff, which is horrifying and traumatic. And there has to be something that can be done about that, because I just can't see any circumstances in which somebody's underwear would be relevant. Unless there was semen or something else. But in terms of this is what she was wearing, that's not relevant. Or past sexual history, not relevant. So there is stuff we can do there. But the underlying thing, which is that a person accused of rape is facing life altering situation. I mean, they're never going to be employed in any proper job again. They're going to find it very difficult, I suspect, ever to get a future romantic partner. It is a life altering accusation, and you have the right to defend yourself and make every case that you're innocent. You have the right to be presumed innocent. And I don't think we can even dream of losing that. It's the cornerstone of what's made our system of justice work for a couple of 100 years. If we start throwing it out on the basis of, well, we have to give a presumption of honesty to accusers. I mean, the fact that you're having the trial is the presumption of honesty of the accuser. If we just presumed the accuser was lying, then we wouldn't even press charges. The presumption of honesty of the accuser is the reason we're having the trial in the first place. But in this situation where we're not even having a trial, where we're just having an inquiry, we're having headlines that say thousands of lives ruined, etc., and we're having potentially massive compensation payouts. I mean, I'm just going to say this in relation to the mother and baby homes compensation scandal payout. I was looking at this, and as best I can tell, the only circumstances in which somebody did not receive compensation was where they made an accusation that they had been abused in a particular mother and baby home, and then it transpired that they had not actually been in that mother and baby home. Those are the only circumstances where a compensation payment was not made, and the average compensation payment was €70,000. Now, my first question would be, if somebody comes before a compensation tribunal and says, I was in St. Clabert's and I was abused and I want compensation, and then turns out that they weren't in St. Clabert's, surely there's a fraud case to be answered there. But secondly, it just seems to me to be extraordinary that those would be the only circumstances in which somebody, and there were thousands of payments made in relation to alleged abuse there. And I wonder, when you start setting up tribunals for historic abuse in schools, and you say there's an average payout going to be a 70,000 here, and by the way, here's a list of priests who were known to have been active in these years and abused. I think the state is inviting an overly generous compensation payout scheme. I'll put it like that. And I think there are huge problems with this whole situation that it's kind of verboten to talk about.
Well, I do not think that. I mean, the nature of these things is that there is going to be no proof. So, in many ways, the state just has to take it on the chin that, okay, there's a percentage of you roll into your costings a percentage of fraud, but ultimately you have to trust that 98% of people are honest and were there and were like, what choice do you have? You can't interrogate people and ask them to provide evidence of something that happened 40 years ago. They're not going to have it. No. And they won't remember dates and times, and so like if you're having a tribunal, or you're giving people compensation for things like where the state should have done more to protect them, I think you have to take it on the chin to a certain extent. I mean, we're not, we spend money on nonsense, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So, of all the things as a taxpayer that offend me in Ireland that we waste money on, this would feature a small element of fraud within this type of thing. I think is, I can live with it.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I'm just a stickler on this stuff. I mean, I think that. I think what you said there, you don't remember dates and times, but you're sure it happened to you sometime in the 1960s. Therefore, I should get compensation for it. I don't think that's good enough. Like, you can call me a heartless bastard if you want. Maybe I am a heartless bastard, but that's not you, sir. I'm saying to the people watching this. But I think you need more than that.
But what would you have, John? What would you have? Like, what could you have?
Well, this is the thing. I don't think you can establish that, beyond any reasonable doubt that somebody was definitely molested in the 1960s. If the accused person is dead, which they may well be, and the accuser is elderly, I don't know how the state can stand that up.
But then nobody, then, if the person who abused you is dead, well, then just tough shit. I mean, even if they're alive.
This is why I'm not a politician. I probably wouldn't win votes on that stance. But I don't. But
if you follow through what you're saying, like, it's either you go back to putting a statute of limitations on child abuse charges, and say if the case is not brought within a certain amount of years, it's gone, or you say, which we don't, or you say no. Regardless of when the case comes, you'll never get any compensation. You'll never get a day in court because it's just too much time.
But the statute of limitations is there for a reason. I'm not here to defend child sex abusers. When they're found guilty, no matter what age they are, they should spend the rest of their lives in prison for the damage they have wrought on young people. But the statute of limitations exists in law for a reason, which is beyond. It is there because beyond a certain period of time, it is almost impossible to give somebody a fair trial. Like, you can't have a fair trial for somebody who is accused of something 30, 40, 50 years ago, where there are no witnesses, where there is no documentary record, where there is no physical evidence, and it is just one person pointing the finger and go, this person abused me. The other person says, no, I didn't. And you ask a jury to say, well, who's telling the truth? Oh, and by the way, one of them is a Christian brother, and one of them was a student. I mean, that isn't justice. That is just asking 12 people in a box to weigh up who they trust more based on all their preconceptions about what's happened and gone before. So yeah, I would. I don't care if it would get me kicked out of office. I would bring back the statute of limitations on these kinds of cases, because I don't think you can possibly get justice for anybody by just saying, well, we're going to have the presumption that you will be believed. I understand why it's done emotionally. I understand that it makes loads of people feel good, but it's not justice as it's ever been understood. And it's going to end up costing the state an awful lot of money. It is going to end up dragging up, we're going to have a whole other months and months and months of conversations about how bad things were in the past. And indeed they were. And for what? What will we have at the end of it? What will the country have achieved? What will we feel better about? Will people not have been abused anymore? No, it's an orgy of self-flagellation as a society that we're inflicting upon ourselves. So yeah, if mine is a minority view in the country, so be it. If I think it makes me a cruel bastard, so be it. But that's what I think.
I think that people who are sexually abused, particularly, in Ireland, there's been such a huge culture shift. And, like, we could talk all day about how people didn't have conversations about these kind of things back then. Now we don't have real conversations about other things, but that's a whole other show. But I think that trauma and things like that, by their nature, they're like, they don't come out very often until later. Society is now much more open to people admitting that these things happen to them. I think on the balance of everything, these people are owed an audience at the very least for what happened to them.
Okay. And look, I recognize that most people will agree with you on this, as they probably should on most things, because you're a rock of sense. But I also think it's a conversation that we just No one else is having this conversation. The conversation is entirely just, we'll go along with it. Anyway, we talked about it for long enough. Let's talk about bus shelters.
Is it a gate? Would you say does it qualify as a gate? Bus shelter
I think
gate?
It'd be both a shelter. I feel like I mean, yes, Minister. Now, can a shelter also be a gate? Bus shelter gate, or it's actually bus shed, isn't it? Bus shed gate. I think it qualifies as a gate. For me, the real scandal isn't the 336 grand. That is obviously a scandal. For me, the scandal is that we're now a week into it and nobody can tell us who actually spent the 336 grand. And spoiler, nor will they ever.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I love the way the people who work in the building, B, run the country, are all like, there should be accountability for this. Like, I mean, who did this? And I get that, like, they don't sign off on every, like, line by line item that the OPW, like, does. But at the same time, I still think that, like, it's comical for the Taoiseach of the country to come out and be sort of like, we're going to get to what happened here? This is a disgrace. You're the Taoiseach. Like,
yeah,
ring someone. Do you know what I mean? Like, find out before you come out.
We're going to have an inquiry into it. Surely the inquiry should be to look at the purchasing order, look at who signed the purchasing order, ring that person up and say, did you approve this purchasing order or did somebody above you sign it off? There's your inquiry. It lasts 2 minutes. Like, no, we're going to have an inquiry to find out. But, spare me this bullshit. And it is bullshit of, we don't know, we need an inquiry. Or the worst one, well, not every minister signs off on every level of expenditure. There are two reasons that's bullshit. Number one, 336,000 euros is 0.5% of the OPW's 700 million budget for the year. If a minister was signing off on every expenditure of 336 grand in the OPW, he would have to make 200 decisions a year, Sarah. 200 decisions. So don't tell me this is below his notice. Like, that is a large amount of money. You wouldn't, if you were working in Apple, which is a much bigger company than the Office of Public Works, and you just, there is nobody below senior management level who has the authority to sign off on 336 grand. There just isn't.
But also, with a phone call, Elon Musk could find out who changed the toilet roll on the 3rd floor of their office building in Dundrum or in Dublin with a couple of phone calls. Like, I'm sorry. One could find out.
And the second thing on this is, like, don't give me this, we don't know who signed off on that. That's below our notice. When every minister in the government, every single last one of them, is constantly putting out press releases to their constituency about how they signed off personally, they secured the 10,000 euro grant that's going to put a new roof on the local sports club, the 4,000 euro grant for the local after school club, the 32,000 grant for a new gym in the local old people's home. They're constantly at it. So we don't sign off on 336 grand, but the new post box we put in, we did that. I mean, go away and shite. Sorry. Like, and why are we putting up with it? Why do we put up with it as a country? It's astonishing to me.
I love as well that it's a bike shelter. Just, it would be, wouldn't it? Like, and no disrespect to bikes. I'm all for bikes. Bikes are fine, but it's just kind of, and then I saw online, like, people just starting to just blame the Greens. Sure, why not? Like, because surely if it's a bike shelter, it was something to do with them.
Something to do with them,
like, yeah. It's got to be something to do with them. They must have done, you know what I mean? They must have been involved in some way. But I think it's kind of, it's captured the imagination of the public. No surprise. But it's also just a really good example of a couple of things. One, the sort of lack of connection between the government, who are talking about, the cost of living and the this and the that, and just they're kind of not really connecting the dots when it comes to what people care or are getting annoyed about and what they're doing day to day. But also that we're and I've spoken about this before, but that we have a political class who are constantly in the wrong conversation with the public about the wrong things. And every once in a while, something like this will come up that just, like I said, captures the imagination. And it's not, you know, I mean, some people will, but like, so what? Have a bike shed or whatever. But the conversation about money and spend is all wrong. So the government the government obviously spend money, or there are people in departments who spend money like it's not real, because nobody, if they were spending their own money, would spend 300 and whatever thousand euro on a shed. It's not a bike shed, actually. It's just a shelter. It's not even a shed. A shed has 4 walls and a door and a roof. This is just...
Yeah, you can put a donkey in a shed. You definitely couldn't put a donkey.
This is just like a kind of a gazebo, not even. Just like a thing above 18 bikes. Like,
not much use in winter either, by the way, when the rain starts coming in sideways, I'd suggest.
Sideways, I know, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But so there's a kind of a... It comes back to like a fundamental problem, which is that the conversation, the way in which the public and the government interact talking about money and spend is off. And so the government and people who work in those departments spend money as if it's monopoly money and it's not real. And the public feel very differently about that. And that's why they get so angry about this. Like Sinn Féin are coming out this week talking... Go on.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish your point.
Well, we're being told that you can build a house for, you know, X amount by Sinn Féin, and the government, rightly so, are kind of poo-pooing that. But at the same time, you've just built a bike shelter in the grounds of Leinster House for the price of an amount of money that some people will never be able to get a mortgage for in the current climate, that a single person... And, you know, I know a lot of people who really struggled as single people to buy a house. 300 grand, like, for a mortgage for them is kind of out of reach. And you're spending it on a bike, and you're kind of acting as if somehow you're not really involved in that. That doesn't fill you full of confidence of a government who have control of everything. If this comes out, you know, a journalist did their job, you know, and credit where credit's due. A journalist got this story, released it, and then everybody kind of acts as if like, oh my God, somebody should really be accountable for that. You're accountable for it. You're spending our money like it's monopoly money, and we're angry about that because there are other things that we want money to be spent on. There are places where we feel like money is lacking, and what you're overspending on nonsense. And when you get caught out for that, you act like, what?
Yeah, but
somebody should find out about that. Like,
there are two things. Sorry. There are two things that occur to me about this. I mean, first of all, on the Sinn Féin house building plan, which we haven't really talked about in the podcast, and you know, if you're one of our few Sinn Féin listeners, or maybe many Sinn Féin listeners, we're sorry about that. I wrote a piece about it on, I think, Tuesday, that said lots of good ideas, some bad ideas, some problems ignored. We can talk about it another time. We're not going to have time to get into it in detail on this episode. But what I will say is their houses would cost less than the bus shelter. They want the state to build houses for, I think, 308,000 euro each. Which is just the 125,000 that the state is going to build with 39 billion quid. It works out about 308 grand each, which is actually less than it took this government to build a bus shelter. And I am always astonished by the naivete of the political left. Like, God love them, I love them, but they're always convinced the state can do these things better than the market. And this is the whole reason Sinn Féin's going to do this big house building plan, because the market isn't doing it. And we're going to go in and build cheap houses where the market isn't. Show me one example in the last 50, and I appreciate Sinn Féin hasn't been running the state. Show me one example in the last 50 years of the state delivering a really good infrastructure project ahead of time and under budget. You know, it reminds me of somebody who said this week about the bus shelter, and Simon Harris's astonished face, his goldfish opening mouth, going, oh, good, this is not acceptable. How did this happen? Somebody said, wait till he finds out about the Children's Hospital, Sarah. Wait till he finds out what's happened there. I mean, what's he not going to think when he finds out about the overspend on that? And the final point I'd make is, this is another example of you, the public, just not doing your jobs again. Because once again, the public is standing there, mouth agape. 330,000 euro. That's the price of a house. That's what they've wasted on a bus shelter. That's a disgrace, Ted, so it is. 330,000 euro. And it has the country agog. How could somebody waste 330,000 euro? Well, I'll say the same thing that somebody else said to Simon Harris. Lads, wait till you find out about the Children's Hospital. Wait till you find out about the billions. And bear in mind, each billion is 1,000 million euro. Multiple billions that have been gone awry on that process. But we're never going to change the public on that. The public will always care more about some lad getting €500 more than he should have in his expenses than some government department losing 500 million on a bad infrastructure project. That's just the world we live in.
Yeah, and we you know, I was thinking about, like, a few weeks ago we were all aghast about the bailout for RTE, you know, and that was monopoly money as well. That's gone now. We're on to another thing. Like, I mean, we kind of deserve it in a way, but on the other hand, I think that the bike shelter, is a new kind of frontier for nonsense. I don't think it'll make any difference. But
there's the title of this week's podcast, sir.
A new frontier for nonsense. Yeah. But yeah, do you know what it is? It's not the spend. It's not that it's a bus shelter, bike shelter. It's the fact that nobody knows who signed off on it, or will never know, and that it's the play acting of stunned. Oh my God, what is this? What happened, from literally the leadership of our country? I don't get that. I think you make a phone call, if you're in charge, if you're in the leadership position, you make some phone calls, you find out what's going on, you come out and you give answers. You don't go, oh my God, like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you're on a plane and you turn to your left and, you know, the smoke coming out and the pilot is sitting beside you going, Jesus, what's that? Like, sorry, are you not flying the plane? Do you not know what's happening?
I have heard, Sarah, I've heard it. No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was ranting, done.
Yeah, so I have heard, and one of the things about this job that I do for a living is that you obviously, you can't print something unless you can stand it up lock, stock and barrel. So unfortunately, what I'm about to say, if I was able to print these things, they would have been printed. But I have heard horror stories from people who are working in construction and in procurement in the public sector about some of the contracts, about some of the failure standards on the contracts, about some of the money that's being wasted left, right and centre.
Oh boy.
People, yeah, and I think anyone who's reasonably close to that sector or who knows people in it will have heard similar stories. And what strikes me about this is, like, it is not about a €336,000 bike shed, really. Because if it was just about a €336 bike shed, we could say, okay, cock up, move on, apologise.
Yeah.
It is that the €336 bike shed is a monument to what we all know or suspect is happening right across the rest of government. It's the one. Yeah. It's the one where they got caught. You know, yeah. It is this. It's the voting machines. It is the children's hospital. It is all these things that are happening on a daily basis, or that we suspect, or I think a lot of us know are happening on a daily basis. And they're standing there scratching their head, going, "Well, jeepers, I don't know how that would have happened now." And the sense that I just have that these guys are not up to it. They're not up to managing a state, which is what the ultimate job of the government is. Anyway. Do you know what they are up to?
What?
They are up to regulating Oasis ticket sales. Did you get Oasis tickets?
Okay. So we have discussed on this podcast that I went to Taylor Swift, but I must admit I'm not a big concert person. And I would rather, and again, don't come for me in the comments, just a taste. I would rather chew glass than go to an Oasis concert. Not my cup of tea. At all.
Were you a Blur girl, or? Yeah,
I actually was more of a Blur fan, but also I just Croke Park concerts standing, and I'm just no. I like seats and, you know, whatever. Anyway, it's not my cup of tea. But I felt really sorry for people, some people that I know and are friends with, who are really big Oasis fans, who got up and queued and were like 19,000 in the queue and this kind of thing. And then eventually some of them got to the end, and then it was like €400, €450 a piece for standing tickets. Outrageous. Now, I don't know how ticket pricing works, but I gather from what I've seen and heard this week, it seems like, you know, the Ticketmaster are saying that the prices are set by the artists. I don't know about that, but Anyway, I think a lot of people are upset and annoyed, and they have a right to be annoyed. But I think, once again, it's a government overreach to be getting involved in how tickets are priced.
Yeah. I mean, funny, before we get into the topic you were saying about concerts, I don't go to them. I wouldn't call it, they say agoraphobia, the fear of wide open spaces. I don't have that. I love wide open spaces. I have, and maybe somebody can fill me in the comments what it's called. And it doesn't even rise to the level of phobia, but I have a discomfort in big crowds. I don't like being in big crowds. I don't like, you very rarely see me. I think I've been to Croke Park maybe 3 or 4 times in my life. And you generally with parents or family, or because some reason for me to be there or drive along. I don't like it. I don't like concerts. I don't like the feeling of being hemmed in. I don't like the feeling of all of it. So like I would sometimes watch Glastonbury on television as BBC stream it, and I wouldn't miss out. I wouldn't feel like I missed out because I wasn't actually there.
I mean, Take That played in Malahide a few months in the summer, and loads of people my age, women were like mad for Take That or whatever. And I was sitting in the house, and as was true most days this summer, it was belting rain. And I was sitting on my couch looking out and thinking, I mean, honestly, if you said to me, here's a free ticket and €500 if you go to that concert, I wouldn't go. Like there is of no interest. The rain, outdoors, standing in a field, drinking in a plastic cup. It's just like, I get it. Some people love it. My brother loves concerts, goes to loads of concerts. He's into it. But he made me come to Electric Picnic once years ago. He gave me a ticket, and I made a friend of mine at the time drive down and get me halfway through the night. I was, no, not my thing. But it is a huge deal for people. The band were broken up for 15 years. I know a lot of people who are proper super fans of Oasis, and I think it's really crap for them that the pricing is done in that way.
Did I ever tell you about the time I broke out of Electric Picnic? I think I'm the only person. Yeah, I'm the only person in history ever to have literally escaped Electric Picnic. So I've only been once.
Yeah, same.
No, but I literally had to escape through the hedge. So like what happened was I was there about 11, 12 years ago. My good friend Nishan Nunn, who runs the Minefield Festival. He might regret that I called him my good friend on the podcast, because he generally associates with people who do not think like you and I, sir. But he brought me down to the Minefield Festival. And I remember it was a discussion. It was something of the European Union with Fintan O'Toole and various others. And I got to meet Ed Sheeran behind the scenes. Everything was all cool. I was there for an hour, and I did my event. And then I was like, I'm going to go home. But somebody else who really wanted to spend the rest of the time there, and I had this ticket, and I handed it over to them. And I was like, sure, I'm not using this. You take this ticket, like that'll last you. I don't know whether they had snuck in or they only had a ticket for 1 day, and I had the full 3-day ticket. And I said, hey, take the ticket. So then I went to leave, and I walked out to the exit, and they were like, no, sorry, you can't get out without your ticket, because they didn't want people doing what I had just done. And I was like, oh God, what am I doing? I'm stuck here in Electric Picnic. So I had to walk around, and I literally had to escape through the hedge. And like it took me about an hour to find a piece of the hedge that wasn't guarded, and then another hour to walk back to my car. But yeah, I broke out of Electric Picnic. So that's my concert going story. I just couldn't bear the idea of being there. Anyway, yeah, on the ticket price regulation thing, I mean, I just don't understand why government would get involved. It's not your job to regulate ticket prices. The tickets are expensive because Oasis sell loads of tickets, and people can't get the seats because there's more demand than there is supply. That's the free market work. Like, I want to go on holiday to Bora Bora in the South Pacific next year, but I can't because it's 25 grand, because that's the demand for trips to that island. Are you going to regulate the travel agents? Like, it's a terrible precedent. And it's also just an example of politicians going, well, here's a problem we can solve because we bloody well can't build a bus shelter for less than 336 grand.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be a better way than having people queue for hours and then telling them that a ticket that they expected to be €80 is €450. Like that's a system that's not fair and not working, and it's not right that that Ticketmaster or whoever the artist has done it that way. But the politicians getting involved in it is a completely separate thing, and politicians getting involved in it is another example of like, let's be seen to be doing something here because we might, and they won't do anything about it because they can't, because it's a private business, and second of all, stay in your lane, your bike lane, actually. Because now, you know, you have loads of them and a bike shelter. That was 350 grand.
Yeah. All right, look, we're going to leave it there. It's just, we could go on for another hour, actually, with everything that happened this week. But it's been a pleasure as always, Sarah. And thank you to all the viewers and indeed the listeners, because we still have loads of people who just listen to us, for joining us and putting your faith in us indeed every week. We really appreciate that. So until next week, from Sarah and from I, it is goodbye. And that was another edition of The Week That Really Was. Take care.